Thank you and good morning. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you here today with such great leaders from the whole state of Utah and around the country. I would like to officially welcome you to the University of Utah, particularly on behalf of President Pershing. He regrets he could not be here, but we're thrilled to host you all here today. For those of you who have not been here before, the University of Utah is the state's flagship research institute. In fact, the only Tier 1 research university in the state of Utah. And as you will find out as we go through the meetings today, also a fantastic player in the global space. We are thrilled to host the Global Cities Initiative here on our campus because our mission is to become a global leader in learning, scholarship, and cross-cultural engagement. Indeed, many of you know we have many activities going on throughout the world, including just this last year, starting a University of Utah campus in South Korea. We have students from all over Asia attending the University of Utah, a University of Utah degree in a very fantastic part of the country. Our students here at the University of Utah come from all over the world. We have about 31,000 students attending school here, and about 3,500 of them come from other parts of the world. We have 180 languages spoken by students right now here at the University of Utah. And we are thrilled about the diversity they bring to our community, to our school, and we think it helps in the overall education of our students here at the University of Utah. We believe it is our job to contribute to the global economy. Today, I would like to make a special thank you to the Honorable Mayor Ben McAdams. Those of you who know him well know that he is a visionary. He's responsible for helping us here today. Great friend of the University of Utah, great friend of mine. Thank you for all that you are doing here, Mayor. Thank you. As you know, Mayor McAdams has been working closely with the founding partners of the Global Cities Initiative, the Brookings Institute and JPMorgan, to make our region more globally fluent and helping to strengthen our economy. We are all here today with the goal of increasing our competitiveness globally. Today, we're going to learn some amazing tools. We'll have the information that will help us succeed globally. We'll establish connections that will help us grow our businesses, that will help strengthen our economy. Because you're here at the University of Utah, I thought I would mention that we are doing our part as well. If any of you have read some news recently about the U, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce announced that the University of Utah, through our Advanced Materials and Manufacturing Initiative, thank you, Jeff Edwards, also, who helped with this, has been selected as one of 12 communities in the United States to participate in the Investing in Manufacturing Communities Partnerships. Under the direction of Dr. Greg Jones, we will help build a world-class composites industry. It's already existing here, and it reflects what we should be doing and thinking about today. You capitalize on your strengths, and this is one of those here in the state of Utah in this advanced composites industry. And because of that designation, we will be designated as the federal liaison for the grants and for the money that will flow through this particular thing. So those of you sitting here today, find someone from the University of Utah, because they're going to get a lot of love for the next couple of years because of this. This will help us tremendously in the global marketplace. It will have impact on all the states going forward. We would like to welcome some very important people that have helped make this possible from the Global Cities Initiative today. Craig Zollinger, Chase's Managing Director for Utah. We'll hear from him in just a moment. The Honorable Richard M. Daley, Chairman of GCI, and the longest-serving mayor of Chicago, 21 years. Thrilled to have you here with us today. I can't believe you made it that long in that business. Glad you're here. Amy Liu of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Institute, and who is also co-directing GCI, and Mara Gutman, also of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy, who manages GCI. It's now my distinct honor to introduce to you Craig Zollinger, President and CEO of JPMorgan Chase here in Utah. Many of you know him. A great champion of economic development, so much so that Governor Huntsman himself tasked him to help lead his transition team when he became governor of the state of Utah. Also helps with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah and also the United Way, a great ambassador for global economic improvement in the state of Utah. Please help me welcome Mr. Craig Zollinger.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Craig Zollinger, as mentioned, Managing Director and the head of the Utah market for JPMorgan Chase. On behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Salt Lake Forum of the Global Cities Initiative, a joint project of the Brookings Institution and JPMorgan Chase. Before we get started, I'd like to thank Mayor Ben McAdams and his terrific leadership, as well as many other city, county, and statewide elected officials who have made time to join us here today. We're here to talk about our region, and I couldn't be more proud that the Global Cities Initiatives is here in Salt Lake. Global Cities is a 5-year project that we launched in 2012 to help our communities think about local economic development in a different way, in a more global context. As leaders, we need to better understand and prepare for this new urban age and an economic order. The Global Cities Initiatives helps by, 1, producing new research to help metro leaders assess their global positions. 2, convening metropolitan leaders like we are here today to explore best practices and policy innovations and strengthening global engagement. And 3, since 2013, guiding economic development teams from select metropolitan areas, including Salt Lake County, in the creation and implementation of actionable global commerce strategies. At JPMorgan Chase, we help people and organizations with their financial needs. But in today's economy and today's challenges, we believe we also have a responsibility to use our firm's resources, expertise, and global reach to help tackle some of the big social and economic challenges facing our country and facing the world. We know that the world's economic map is shifting, and we believe that Greater Salt Lake is well positioned to succeed in this global economy. We're positioned well because of our strong clusters of economic activity in life sciences, defense and homeland security, outdoor products and recreation, software development and IT, aerospace, and financial services. Moreover, thanks to the vision of the World Trade Center, EDC Utah, the University of Utah, and many leaders across the market, we now have a thoughtful international export market assessment for the region. You'll hear more about that this morning, but it is something we help open our eyes to the region's strengths and opportunities. At JPMorgan Chase, we are committed to our community's success, not only for now, but for the long run. This morning, we'll hear our speakers discuss the need to expand our economic growth and job creation through global trade, which is critically important. However, we need to align that exciting venture with making sure local population has the skills and expertise that will be necessary for many of those new jobs. That's why, through the JPMorgan Chase Foundation, we've invested in several programs that support workforce readiness. Programs like the Financial Solutions Lab. The Financial Solutions Lab is a $30 million 5-year commitment from JPMorgan Chase that aims to identify tools to help consumers increase savings, improve credit, and build assets. Also, the New Skills at Work program. Workforce readiness gap reports will be produced in local markets to help drive more effective and strategic local workforce planning and informed program development efforts. We need to continue to invest in highly educated workforce, strong infrastructure, and business support systems that will be needed to help us compete with the rest of the world. I appreciate that so many of you are interested in coming together as a community to talk about our region's global economic competitiveness. Our success will require collaboration across jurisdictions and across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. It is now my pleasure to introduce JP Morgan's terrific partner in the Global Cities Initiative, Amy Liu, Senior Fellow and Co-Director of Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program. Amy is a leading expert on advancing regional U.S. economic competitiveness and focuses on the importance of strengthening industry clusters like those I just mentioned. Prior to Brookings, Ms. Liu was Special Assistant to HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros and staffed the U.S. Senate Banking Committee's subcommittee on Housing and Urban Affairs. Please join me in welcoming my partner and friend, Amy Liu.
Thank you so much, Craig. We at Brookings really value this partnership we have with JPMorgan Chase. In fact, I think, honestly, that the Global Cities Initiative is one of the most inspiring, forward-looking, and impactful efforts in all of the Brookings Institution. It's a real pleasure to be here in Salt Lake City to count this region as one of our key partners in the Global Cities Initiative and the Global Cities Exchange, and it's exciting to help you all kick off your first ever Metropolitan Export Plan. You know, when Bruce Katz and I started the Brookings Metro program 20 years ago, one of the first things we did is we came here to Utah to learn about regionalism. This was a state and a community that was at the forefront of regional collaboration, regional visioning, and land use and transportation planning. No doubt you are blessed with a lot of natural assets, but the high quality of life that you have today is not by accident. It's a result of the values and the spirit of action of this community. Now, given your participation in the Global Cities Initiative, we think the Salt Lake region has an opportunity to bring that collaborative spirit to bear on producing smart economic development, one nested in the realities of the global economy. But success in the global economy is not assured. Indeed, this is a region that has rebounded well in the wake of the global recession. If you look at your peers in the Rocky Mountain West region, the Salt Lake region gained net jobs. You've gained net jobs since the recession at nearly the same pace as Denver, but faster than in Phoenix and Las Vegas, both markets that have actually still faced job deficits. However, it's not clear that your workers are better off. The Salt Lake region has experienced a decline in the share of your 25 to 64-year-olds that have a job today compared to pre-recession. And the only exception on this map is Detroit, which is actually holding its own on this front. And meanwhile, we know nationally that household incomes have lagged and in some cases have fallen compared to the growth in the national output. So that means we need to do a better job of creating more jobs with better pay that lift more unemployed and underemployed people into the marketplace and give them the kind of family-sustaining wages so they are better off as the economy improves. Now, to do that, we need to rethink our approach to economic development, away from debt and consumer spending and towards the real drivers of growth, such as trade, innovation, talent, and infrastructure. And in practical terms, that means that state and local leaders need to focus less attention on luring companies into the marketplace, which nets just about 2% of job growth on average in any state. And instead, we need our leaders to focus on that 98%, the existing firms and startups that generate the bulk of economic growth and job growth in our states and our regions. Now, if you're still a champion for that 2%, even the Site Selectors magazine would acknowledge that the pipeline of deal flows are drying up. Since 2000, the number of firm locations have actually dropped by 50%. So economic development leaders, what's happening is economic development leaders are actually fighting for a declining and honestly an insignificant pie of economic activity. So our leaders then need to right-size our efforts, spend less time looking outside for business attraction deals, instead spend more time working with your existing firms, help them learn about exporting opportunities, help them expand their customer base so they can grow, and that really has become the new arsenal in business retention and expansion efforts. Now, when you focus on the base of your existing businesses, what you're doing is also focusing on your traded sectors that make your region unique. To export, the regional economy must produce high-value goods and services that are better than your competition. These traded sectors, such as aerospace and medical device manufacturing, computer systems design, medical diagnostics, these are called, quote, traded because they are able to sell their goods and services to customers outside of the region. That export then brings income into the region, and it helps expands the whole economic pie. With more income means more money for firms to invest in their workers, either in the form of higher wages or more training for their workers. It means more spending and revenue for localities and more jobs, as this chart shows. Now, despite the importance of traded sectors to regional growth, we have actually lost our way. According to Nobel laureate Michael Spence, Only 2% of U.S. job growth between 1990 and 2007 actually came from traded sectors. We, in fact, became too obsessed with housing, retail, and consumer spending, and less focused on the value-added products and services that make up our economy. So given this backdrop, I want to reinforce why exports and global engagement matters, why advanced industries are key to trade economy, and how regions around the country are beginning to innovate and compete in the global marketplace. Now let's talk first about that global imperative. Now to start, global trade matters because the bulk of future global economic growth, 81%, is going to take place outside the United States. And despite all the talk about the slowdown in emerging markets, the IMF still predicts that the world economy will continue to shift and expand. Now, this growth reflects the expansion of the middle class in emerging markets. Today, what we see here on this map is that the bulk of the middle class consumers in the world are found in the mature markets of the US, the EU, Japan, and our NAFTA partners. But by 2050, that picture is going to dramatically change. The OECD predicts that more than half the world's consumers are going to live in those 1 billion plus markets of China and India. Meanwhile, North America's share of the global middle class will shrink to 7%. So if you're doing business in Canada or Mexico only, that's not going to be sufficient in the long run. Now, the shift to emerging markets is not just a long-term trend, but it's actually happening right now. According to our global Metro Monitor, when we looked at the economic performance of the 300 largest world cities, what you see is this list of the 10 strongest performing city economies for the 5 years running up to 2014. All of these markets are in China and Asia, except for one, which is in Turkey. Meanwhile, where do you think the US markets come on the list? First one to make it on the list is Austin, Texas, coming in at 65. The Rocky Mountain regions, led by Salt Lake region, comes in at 97th. Now you can view this as a threat, a sign of increased global competition, or you can view it the way the Global Cities Initiative views it, as an opportunity to find new customers. Now, with all the talk about emerging markets, we have to remind ourselves that we don't always have to look at the shiny new places to benefit from growth. The U.S. actually has trade agreements with 20 nations right now, from the NAFTA corridor to CAFTA, which is the countries in Central America, and the latest set of FTAs with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. Of these markets, 47% of U.S. trade actually occurs with just these 20 nations. So they're really important to our trade economy. And we have a $55 billion, not $7.3 billion, so that is incorrect. We actually have a $55 billion trade surplus in manufactured goods with these nations when we actually have a trade deficit worldwide. Now, if we can find ways to export more, it will have great benefits for our regional economy. It leads to higher levels of job growth, higher levels of output growth, and these are good quality jobs. Whether in services or manufacturing, they pay 20 to 17% more in wages than their non-exporting peers. Now, by 2014, the U.S. had about 11.3% of its economy driven by trade, which is actually relatively low by global standards. Now, in contrast, this region is actually an export powerhouse, with about 15% of your economy benefiting from trade. And this is certainly due to your strengths in the mining industry, but your production of precision instruments and medical devices and equipment are included as well. And going global is also good for businesses. Small, mid-sized manufacturers who saw their exports grow during the recession, saw the revenues grow by 37%, compared to folks who stayed focused only on the domestic market. Their revenues declined by 7%. This reinforces the benefit of having a diversified customer portfolio base. And our cities in the Global Cities Exchange have also been really interested in middle market firms. These middle market firms are those that generate anywhere from $10 million to $1 billion in sales, and therefore they have a proven product, and they have the capacity to invest in and even take on some risk for going abroad. But across the board, middle market firms that saw their revenues expand, that added jobs, had positive projected earnings for the next coming year, each of those sold products abroad compared to those who did not. Now, the flip side of exports is foreign direct investment, which is another important focus of GCI. FDI here, what we call FDI, are certainly foreign-owned establishments that move into the market, but it also includes infusion of capital into a firm, either through a global private equity investment or mergers and acquisitions. Just like global trade and the middle class demand, FDI is expanding nationwide, reaching about $1.3 trillion today. But of that level, the level of foreign investment in the U.S. has actually stayed flat since the 1980s. In fact, the U.S. is now capturing where we once captured nearly half of all global investment. It is now only home to 12% of global FDI. Again, there are simply more choices today for highly mobile firms and capital. Now, like exports, foreign-owned firms create jobs, 5.6 million of them, and they offer good wages, often more so and higher than their domestic-owned firms. But more importantly, and the real promise of foreign investment, is that foreign firms are major exporters and they are major investors in R&D. They often actually bring new innovation and new technologies into the marketplace. Let me give you some examples. Toyota, for instance, brought lean manufacturing to the United States. German firms like Siemens, BMW, Volkswagen, they bring a strong commitment to training and to apprenticeships, which are being now adopted by U.S. states and metros. Swiss pharmaceutical giant Novartis invested in a major medical research partnership with MIT, so it's strengthening Boston's position as a hub of life science solutions. In short, foreign firms really can increase our innovation might. Now, despite the common perceptions, FDI is actually not primarily about luring a major foreign manufacturer to a greenfield site. In fact, 87% of foreign investment flows and nearly half of job growth come in the form of mergers and acquisitions. For many firms, M&A provides young firms and mid-market firms with the needed capacity to expand and, in fact, tap into international markets that are brought in as assets from their parent foreign firm. So the bottom line from all of this is that boosting exports and foreign investment is critical to positioning this region for growth and prosperity in today's hyper-integrated global economy. And the Salt Lake City region actually starts this effort from a position of strength because you are at least a high exporter already in this region. I would have to say, though, but when you start integrating FDI into your strategy, you're going to quickly learn that you underperform the nation on that front. And in fact, where you do have to have FDI, it's primarily in hospitality and mining. Now, to compete effectively on trade, you have to have good product. You have to have good product. But in the long run, you actually have to be on the leading edge of product development and discoveries, what we call advanced industries. So these advanced industries are what we call the subset of traded sectors that are undergirded by innovation, human capital, and infrastructure. Now, in a recent report, we found that the U.S. is home to 50 segments of advanced industries that cut across manufacturing, energy, and services. These industries are considered advanced in that they make relatively high investments in R&D, and they employ a relatively high share of scientists and engineers, what we call STEM workers, who can then translate that research into commercial applications. Now, because of their emphasis on the latest technologies, advanced industries contribute the vast majority of exports, patents, and private sector R&D in the nation, despite making up just 9% of all jobs. And these global industries global leadership also explains why AI generates one-fifth of all the output from their very small base. Now, the good news is that the Salt Lake region has a foothold in advanced industries. Advanced industries make up about 16.5% share of this region's economy, but that share still is lower than the national average. Advanced industries are positive because they also generate good-paying jobs, often offering wages that are twice as high as those found in other sectors. And further, these jobs are accessible. They're not limited to the most, the PhDs in the economy. In fact, 1 in 2 of all AI jobs require a worker without a college degree. This region itself has about 71,000 workers in the advanced industries, and I understand that this region is interested in diversifying your economy beyond stone and mineral ores and tourism. This is your list of your advanced industries by employment size, and I think it provides a really good starting point for helping you prioritize your globally distinctive clusters that can be the basis of your global export strategies and even your economic development strategies writ large. So what you have in this market is manufacturing strengths in medical equipment and precision instruments, services strengths such as in computer systems design, architecture and engineering, management consulting. And what you don't see here is that the fastest growing segment of advanced industries in this region is web search portals and internet publishing. Now, next, advanced industries really require a modern multimodal infrastructure network. It matters to know what you produce and their final destination before you can map out the logistics strategy to support the actual trade flows in your community. So let me give you an example. Whether you export or ship heavy granite, lightweight phones, or face-to-face services does have different implications of whether you provide air, truck, train, or ship to those markets. The good news, as you can see on the list left panel, is your region ships and receives goods to 4 international markets among your top 10 final and or original destinations. Your NAFTA partners of Canada and Mexico, Asian markets like China and Japan. Now, if you go to your website, you're going to find that your top 3 goods that you ship by value are metals, energy products, and tools and manufacturing products. So not surprisingly then, 63% of your goods go out by truck, which means road and highway conditions and congestion will probably be your top freight priority. Now on the right is the list of the top 8 final international destinations or origins for your business and tourism travel. Number 1, Cancun. Now, if there's any solace, Cancun is actually on the list of many, many metro areas. And if you look at the list and look further down, you may be attracting hikers and skiers from Vancouver, but there are several business markets here, such as Mexico City, London, and Tokyo. So as you talk to your service firms about whether they export or whether they're interested in exporting, it would be good to know if these match the markets where they do business or where they would like to do business, and whether you have the right mix of airline connections to get them there. So finally, let me talk about the emerging innovations we are seeing in metropolitan areas to better position their economy in the global marketplace. Now, to be sure, the federal government matters to trade. They open new markets, they enforce fair trade, they provide export financing, but cities and metro areas are really where the hard work happens of understanding the needs of your firms and connecting them and your unique industry clusters to the services that get them to those global customers. And also, regional leaders are best situated to align the other aspects of economic development, whether it's innovation, infrastructure, education, workforce development, in ways that create the kind of ecosystem you need to encourage and support global trade and awareness. Now, thanks to our partnership with JPMorgan Chase, the Global Cities Initiative is engaging at least 28 U.S. cities and metropolitan areas and a few international cities, like the guests from London and Toronto that are here with us, in being at the vanguard of global trade and investment. And we are pleased, again, to count Salt Lake region among this list of close-in partners. So what are we learning and seeing as impact now about 3-4 years into this project? First, metropolitan areas are certainly organizing for trade. As each metro area puts together their exports and FDI plans, they are focusing on their distinctive niche in the global marketplace. With all the competition out there, you need to be really clear what your specialization is. Portland now has won contracts in Brazil and Japan because they saw a need. Rapidly urbanizing and mature markets wanted to literally, quote, build green cities. So Portland was smart to brand and package a group of firms that represent one of their core competencies: sustainable land use design, planning, architecture, EV technology, and the manufacture of clean energy buses and transit cars. San Diego's life sciences clusters is proactively finding international venture capital to support the scale-up of their startup firms and mid-sized firms that are on the cutting edge of biosolutions. Syracuse's leadership in exports led to a statewide program, a new global New York, announced by Governor Cuomo to empower and extend regional exports strategies statewide. Second, a number of metros in the Global Cities Initiative are investing in their advanced industries and plugging their export strategies into a larger regional economic playbook. For instance, Louisville, Lexington have a three-part economic plan around innovation, around skills, around trade, to boost their advanced industries, particularly related to automotive and home appliances manufacturing. Now, in addition to helping their manufacturers export, they also have launched First Build, which is a new innovation lab between GE Appliances and Lighting, the University of Louisville, and others to enable entrepreneurs to work with engineers to prototype, test, and manufacture new appliance solutions for the modern home. The region's manufacturers, meanwhile, led by Toyota, have also launched an apprenticeship program, the first really regional one we've seen, to build a pipeline of young talent into their firms. And now 24 young people are starting the program this fall with the area community college. And Syracuse, you see Indianapolis listed here, Chicago, Phoenix. These are all regions that are now focusing on new technologies to boost their advanced industry clusters, whether it's digital manufacturing in Chicago, big data and healthcare technology in Indianapolis to BioCrossroads, or data and remote sensing technologies in central New York. All of their export plans are really important strands to these broader, new, updated regional economic efforts around their advanced industries. And finally, cities are networking globally. They're tapping their cluster assets and building their own bilateral partnerships on trade. These partnerships can take several forms. There are port-to-port relationships like the Miami partnership with Porto Santos in Brazil. There are university-to-university partnerships like the one featured here between Arizona State University and Tec de Monterrey, where they now have a new center on global sustainability to create joint research for business solutions and sustainability. And finally, mayors can transcend their traditional cultural relationships and forge a more comprehensive city-to-city economic partnership like the one we see between Mayor Manuel of Chicago and Mayor Mancera in Mexico City. They signed a first-ever Global Cities Economic Partnership to mutually boost exports, FDI, entrepreneurship, innovation in their shared industry clusters. And today, there is a formal tourism agreement, there's a new business opportunities being explored between their clusters, and there is a new partnership between 1871, the startup incubator in Chicago, and Startup Mexico, so that entrepreneurs in both cities can launch businesses in two markets simultaneously. So let me close with a quote. Some of you are not surprised by this. I did this last night, but I pulled a quote from this region's application to join the Global Cities Initiative. So I'm putting Mayor McAdams and his staff on spot. They wrote that the rationale for why they wanted to join the Global Cities Initiative was this: the community of Salt Lake County wants to expand our economic development efforts with purpose. For too long, we have been reactive to company relocations and expansions without a macro view of how that relocation or expansion fits into our community fabric. We want to embark on a new economic development effort with an eye towards true market expansion, which bridges the divide between international marketplaces and our small and medium-sized business community. Clearly, this is a community that gets it. We are really excited about your vision and your ambition, and Brookings and JPMorgan Chase look forward to helping you realize that. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Merritt Gutman, who is our world traveler and Director of Strategic Partnerships and Global Initiatives for Brookings.
Thank you all very much for being here. I just want to echo what Amy said about the importance of this size of an audience coming, because I think what Salt Lake leadership is going to ask of you at the end of this is to become personally engaged in this effort in order to make it a success. It's not necessarily about Salt Lake County. It's about the business leadership, the civic leadership, individual firms, universities, all being engaged in the process in order to make it successful. And what we're going to do on this panel is bridge the macro context that Amy presented with some specific examples from around the country and the world into a panel discussion about the implications specifically to Greater Salt Lake. So I'd like to introduce first Rick Hubler. He's from Atlanta. He's the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce Senior Director of Global Business Development. Nancy Langdon from Indianapolis, the Indy Chamber Director of Business Development, and Andy Davison from London and Partners, which is the London Mayor's Business Promotion and Engagement Group, Principal Advisor for International Business, and also previously worked for UK Trade and Investment, which is the national UK effort around increasing international engagement. I also want to acknowledge, as Amy mentioned, yesterday we convened this current cohort of US and international cities that are involved in implementing export strategies or currently developing them. So several of them are in the audience. In addition to Atlanta and Indianapolis and London, we have Toronto, Fresno, Seattle, St. Louis, Kansas City. I always forget some. Atlanta is here. Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Fresno.
City. Throw it out there.
This is an audience participation planning program. So, and of course, I was going to call out Houston very specifically. So if everyone could just stand up and be recognized for coming to Salt Lake and hosting. So I want to start with Rick. Atlanta, busiest airport in the world.
Most
right?
efficient.
How many Fortune 500 companies, 1,000 companies?
Fortune 1000, we're at 27, I believe, and
right.
18 Fortune 500 companies now.
Atlanta, international brand,
Yes.
former Olympic host. So Atlanta seems to be doing pretty well. What was the motivation for Atlanta to specifically focus on increasing this international engagement and export activities?
Well, let me take you back to 2012, so everybody pictured Atlanta 2012. As Merritt can tell you, the mayor of the city of Atlanta, Mayor Reed, is a very competitive man, and he actually encouraged the Economic Development Agency, Invest Atlanta, for the city to apply back in 2012. Now, why I say it's important, let me set the stage. In 2012, our chamber actually began its latest 5-year economic plan to go out to the community and talk about economic growth. And within our research of that, to set the stage, 2008, the downturn in Atlanta hit us pretty hard. And in our research in 2012, we discovered that at the year end of 2012, we had recovered less than 20% of the jobs that we had lost since 2008. We'd lost over 200,000 jobs since 2008. Now, that rate of recovery, we were actually at 19.5%, and this is where the competition comes in. That 19.5% rate actually put us in last place amongst the top 25 metros in the U.S. for recovery of jobs since 2008. So it was a very stark picture of the economy in Atlanta. And when you looked at, okay, how are we going to build a strategy around job recovery, exports was one that we looked at. And on the surface, it seemed like, okay, exports were doing really well for Atlanta. In 2012, we exported a combined goods and services to the amount of $25 billion. That put us in 13th place amongst the top metros. But again, competition comes in. When you look at how we stacked up, how much we actually focused on exports compared to the overall economy, we realized that our export intensity, that's exports as a percentage of our overall economy, was 9.5%. The average for the top 100 metros in the U.S. was 11.95%. So we very quickly saw that we were underperforming when it came to exports. We're an under-exporter. And when you look at the industries that we have in Atlanta, the clusters that we've now started to focus on, these are all industries that have great opportunities around the world. They have global demand. As Amy mentioned, you have everything from 95% of consumers outside the U.S. You have 81% economic growth happening outside the U.S. But also important for our companies, the U.S. brand is a premium around the world. Consumers around the world look at U.S.-made products and services as some of the best in the world. And so we have opportunities for us in industries like cybersecurity, healthcare IT, telecommunications, wireless mobility, infrastructure, civil aviation. When you talk about our airport being the busiest in the world, we have a great group of companies that have experience in building airports, in maintaining airports, and designing systems for airports. So these are all opportunities for our companies to grow internationally. But the stat that I talk about the most is one that Amy pointed out, that the OECD says by 2030, the percentage of global middle class that's in North America will drop from 17% down to 7%. So for our companies, when we talk about exports, we joke, as I go out to the community, keep in mind I'm from Atlanta and state of Georgia. So when we talk exports, we get people that, jokingly will say, well, I already export to Alabama, to Arkansas, to Texas. But the reality of it is historically we've pushed companies to export to Canada, to Mexico, because of proximity, because of ease of doing business with those markets, and the fact they're neighbors and they're free trade agreement countries. But going forward, that is not going to be enough. And so it's been important for us to focus on exports and really create the impetus, or to create the drive for our companies to begin looking for opportunities elsewhere in the world.
So you identified both an economic development deficit coming out that motivated you to think about more international opportunities, as well as then uncovering, obviously, the international economy is something that's going to offer up some great benefits to Atlanta and the kind of the Atlantic companies. So it was an economic stress point driven for Atlanta. What was it for Indianapolis that really motivated you to get involved?
Yes, a little different. I would say there was 3 major factors. One was unifying our region. The other was talent, attraction, and retention. The final was just a new progressive way of looking at competitiveness and diversity in our market. First, unity-wise, we had just gone through a massive merger. Within the Indy Chamber, we have an entrepreneurship division, advocacy, regional economic development, the City of Indianapolis economic development, and traditional chamber services. This was a great way for us to connect with our county leados and really unify, looking at a deep dive as to who we are and who we're not, and really looking at a new business retention and expansion tool to help our current companies become more profitable and diverse. On the talent side, we actually have 4.9% unemployment in our state, so we have recovered quite well. However, as Amy alluded, our wages have not. And so we were great deal makers. We really want to progress into be great community makers. And so when we were looking at exporting with a 17% higher average wage, it's a great way for us to, again, look at more talented workers in some ways. They're bilingual, you're doing taxes or legal work, logistics. It all becomes much more complicated if you're going across country lines. And so it's a way for us to have more offerings for competitive jobs and competitive pay to retain the talent within our state and attract new ones. And finally, again, Within our region, our tax structure is a little different than yours, but it was competitive across county lines. And this was a way for us to look at what are we really doing? What is our role as a chamber to not erode our tax base, but actually grow our tax base? And this is a wonderful way to unify and really look at economic differently. It's a paradigm shift because it's not all about capital investment and tracking retained jobs and attracted jobs, but it really is the right thing to do. And it's been a deliberative, inspiring process for our entire region to go forward with this new kind of exciting way of attracting and looking at business development and growth.
So Indianapolis is a very big place. It's surprisingly big when you look at it. And Indianapolis does not come up on everybody's list as a major metropolitan area in the United States, but it's very significant. Did you perceive itself as a global city or thinking about international engagement before this? What was the kind of, how did that work?
No, and in fact, we would talk to companies and they would say, oh, we're not international. Well, where's your major client? In Canada. I think that our branding, which is one area that we found as a void that we're going to work on, isn't seen as an international region. Although if you look at our student population, one of the largest Chinese student populations at Purdue University, we have major corporations like Eli Lilly, Dow, Cummins, Allison Transmission, Cook Pharmica, Dow AgroSciences, that are significant multinational players. So it was, again, a paradigm shift for us to realize that even though we've done well looking forward, we have an obligation for our community to understand that the dynamics are continuing to be more competitive and that we have global assets, we have world-class research and world-class industries. We just need to shout it out loud and align with other metros throughout the global economy that make business sense for our specific markets.
Speaking of global brands, right? So London is in everybody's top 3 list of a global city, and the traditional consideration of what a global city means. It's an international hub for business. It's connected to international markets already extensively by your businesses, by your residents, by just general recognition of all the places to say we want to be concerned about our global engagement and our exporting efforts. Why would London have to be concerned about this?
Fundamentally, to stay competitive, you want to be right at the top of the game all the time. The one thing I've found is that the networks that cities build and attract and move those goods and services, people, talent, is so much more effective. I'm usually based in embassies, consulates around the world, and my job is normally the national agenda. I've been working with the mayor in London for 3 years now, and I actually see that cities are more nimble. They have often more sophisticated business networks. So for me, I think actually I've been missing a trick in all those sort of postings that I've done around the world. Our Prime Minister has put down a sort of challenge to say the UK needs to double its trade to 1 trillion by 2020.
That sounds familiar.
So, and London believes it can play a specific part in doing that. I think the organisation I work with has lots of tools at its disposal, but it doesn't have the export piece. That's done at a national level. And what we wanted to do was start saying, let's take the export piece and just start tailoring it. We don't want to necessarily change what UK trade and investment are doing. Indeed, we want to support what they're doing. So for us, it's about finding some additionality in those niche areas and niche businesses where we can say, let's take someone that's got 30 or 40 staff and in 2 to 3 years trying to scale them up to maybe 300 or 400. And that's the kind of thing we want to play with.
So I think the comparison is a little bit between UKTI as a state government, effectively, because it's very centralized, and London or the other core cities in the UK as metropolitan economies. Having been on both sides of this, you mentioned a recognition that cities are more nimble. Is there a lesson for our states, Utah and others, from your perspective about how to approach economic development and international engagement at the kind of state level versus the local level?
I mean, I think for us at the moment, we do FDI. last year I think London attracted something like 1.9 billion worth of investment from the US alone, created 9,000 jobs. That's great. But we want to do the export piece around that. We feel we're missing a trick. You've sort of got half the toolkit. So we wanted to bring together the trade and investment piece. And, I honestly think that if you've got both of those sides, both sides of the same coin, to be fair, and, calling it FDI, it's international trade. That's as simple as it gets. And we believe that if we have the export element, it will make FDI easier. And because we've got the FDI element, it will make the trade part easier.
Right. So in organizing for this effort, which Salt Lake is going through now, it was interesting to see how this evolved over time. There was a lot of political leadership to catalyze in the regions that we're working with. And then it became, you're both from chambers, it became institutionalized in sort of the business environment. So can you describe a little bit about how you organized for action, how this happened, and what were the key elements in bringing together the right participants from public, private, civic sectors to make this work? Rick.
Okay. Well, as I had mentioned, the Mayor Reed from Atlanta was really the one that drove our application for the Global Cities Initiative, but Brookings came to us as the Metro Atlanta Chamber, fully understanding that it couldn't be just a city initiative. It had to be truly a regional initiative. Now, Metropolitan Atlanta comprises 29 different counties. So 29 different counties, 8,000 square miles. So it's a very large territory. We make up 1/3 of the state of Georgia, and it's very diverse. So when you're dealing with all of those counties, you have exponential number of economic development agencies and chambers as well that were at varying degrees of how involved were they in exports. Now, Metro Atlanta, when you looked at it, really kind of followed a national model. For exports, you had the federal agencies, be it the U.S. Commercial Service or the USIAC, together with the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Development Council, and then our state level, our Department of Economic Development, that were pushing trade. They had the resources. The challenge was at the local levels, so at the city, at the counties, at the municipalities. We didn't really have any consistent or cohesive plan to drive exports. In our case, I work at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and one person, one FTE for trade. It's difficult to cover all 29 counties. So as we went out and started to form our steering committee, we identified certain influential county members who started to understand trade and were willing to share or use their voices, leverage their voices to help get other counties engaged and other political officers engaged. And then we also leveraged our Fortune 500 set. So UPS, together with Chase, chair our steering committee for our Atlanta Metro Export Plan. And then we started to bring in service providers who are involved in trade. So our accountants, our attorneys, our supply chain logistics providers. And then we got some small companies who had some great success stories that also could serve on our steering committee and help with everything from media, op-eds, but more importantly, just telling the story, relating it down to a local level, to a grassroots effort of why exports are important. How can a company go from 5 employees to 20 employees within a few years through international sales? So by pulling all of those players together, all of those stakeholders together, we've been able to form a strong steering committee that's been engaged from the very start, and they've helped to change the story in Atlanta. In Metro Atlanta, our economic development agencies have historically been focused on inward investment. It's always been about FDI, it's always been about recruitment. So exports were a different story. Now we've started out by making sure that everyone's understanding exports, what they are, the importance and the impact of exports, and now how that can benefit their communities. We're not asking them to become experts. What we're trying to do is set them up with the right resources, set them up with the right tools so that they can help their companies while still getting them to the right resources and benefiting their communities.
Atlanta is a little notorious for being very fragmented politically. Right? In the scale, obviously, in multiple counties, politically very competitive between the city of Atlanta and the rest of the region. So could you describe a little bit about if any of that has, how's that changed? You talked about bringing people together. That could not have been as easy as you just kind of described.
No, it took some time. And the one good thing about the export plan, this component of the Global Cities Initiative, is that, as I mentioned, historically our counties have always been focused at the local level on recruitment. So by nature of that activity, it's always been an adversarial relationship. It's always been competitive. One county's trying to recruit investment from Korea. They don't want the neighboring county to be involved in their activities. However, when it came to exports, we were able to get them to understand and really start to champion the fact that what they're doing with exports to promote exports, they can do with a neighboring county, and it's no longer competitive. In fact, it's collaborative. And it's to the point where, in order for us to reach out to 29 counties, we've split up our entire metro area into zones. And what we've done is we've identified certain county leaders who are more vocal, who are our champions. And they're actually now asking us to come out. They're hosting lunches, they're hosting breakfasts with their neighboring counties. And they're the ones who are leading the charge, saying exports are important. Listen to what the Metro Export Plan team has to say. So it's really been, in some senses, a 180 for some of these county economic development agencies, where in the past they were a bit standoffish or at arm's length. Now all of a sudden they're engaged unlike they've never been.
So Indianapolis, you're Midwestern. It's not the same as down in the South, right? What was the story? How did you organize for action, your steering committee, and then implementation?
I think it was fairly similar, although universities have played a really key part. So Mayor Ballard, the current mayor of Indianapolis, I had the pleasure for working for him for 6 years, was really a catalyst for the seed funding for the initial project. And then IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, a visionary named Gil Latz had come from Portland and really was the first introduction to get it started. And then that grew, because this is a team sport. This is not something that can happen in a vacuum. And so similar to Atlanta, but probably work a little bit better as a team. We engaged our cluster organization, our universities, our regional economic development team as we progressed. When it comes to implementation, we're a little different than other states. Still, our state agency only focuses on attraction and investment, and we do not have a World Trade Center in the state. So the Indy Chamber for Implementation really is taking on about 80% of the project. I am dedicated to launching the FDI portion. I have a counterpart on my team who is implementing the export side. We have a consultant through our SBDC office that will be able to provide export advice. And then we have an intern that is continuing to do some further research and company surveys for us. The universities are key for us in implementation. First, on talent. So Purdue University has a pilot program. So we had 5 international MBA students that we placed in local companies to be able to give them that workforce that would be able to help them look at international markets. Butler University has a capstone project that basically is similar to a Gold Key, one-on-one counseling with a company to help them go international. And then we are collaborating with Cleveland State on a Global Targets program that will be facilitated by IUPUI. That'll take 8 companies, a mentoring program with large corporations like Eli Lilly, to help them walk through the same process, culminating with the trade mission collectively as those companies go forward. Our big companies and service providers certainly provide advice. Even Lilly outsources some of its international advice and logistics and accounting. So all those resources can help our smaller shops succeed. And they also serve as funders for the project and then helping us get big things done. So for example, Lilly had a conference on TTIP and TPP. We helped them bring like-minded corporations and business leaders to that event. We're also working on some new strategic airline cargo routes for us. So bringing in Roche and some of the large companies for a new direct line to China is also a way that we've been able to team with the local community.
So identifying those particular activities the university roles, which are new in some aspects, but that all came out of what? Out of your market assessment and...
Yeah, and out of the plan. So part of it was, there was some aha moments, and the universities were like, wow, there's an opportunity here, there's a need for the students that we have. Let's collaborate with the Chamber in a new way. So all of this really came out a direct result of re-envisioning, looking at how do we partner in new and innovative ways, and really came out of the whole export planning process.
So the private sector plays a slightly different role in UK, in the relationship between public and private leadership. Could you describe how you see this impacting that activity in London?
Well, it's very relevant to the export plan. I think that they've never really worked well together, and that's probably because the public sector has always not really thought in terms of when they are partnering with business, what business wants. I think it's traditionally been a one-way street. Whilst we've been putting this programme together, one of our big challenges was funding it. So where are we going to get the money? We're not going to get it from state because there's already national products in play. So we had to think innovatively about how we were going to generate that capital to deliver those services. So the way we've engaged the private sector this time is said, what do you want out of a partnership? So not sponsorship, not give us money and we'll do more of the same. It's what can you bring to us? So very quickly, in a nutshell, we've divided the planet up. We've taken partners for parts of the globe that have a lot of strength in depth in those markets. We've come up with financial arrangements, advisors, secondees, and we'll be able to deliver those services out to those businesses. So we've generated about £2.5 million, so $5 billion. We've got similar business in kind, and then what we've been able to do is take it to the European Union, and they match fund it as well. So we've got quite a nice pot now to work with. So we can look at those markets and really proactively go after them.
What kinds of companies really? I mean, again, London is a hub for international, for global companies. What kinds of firms are you narrowing in on?
So we've got PA Consulting. I've got 250 staff here in the US. We'll be using them. Europe, we're using KPMG. South America, we're using KPMG. India, China, we're using BDO. And then we've got a global infrastructural partner called Benoit, who will sort of straddle all of that.
And the target level for the exporting support activities that they'll be helping with and that you're going to be focusing on, what kinds of companies by size or sectors have you? What's been the strategy development with regard to that?
The national products are very good, and they're sort of focused on getting people export ready. So we're not going to play in the space. We're looking at additionality. A lot of the conversations we've had, not just with our business partners, stakeholders, is there's that middle market that is really upscalable. So trying to take those, as I say, businesses that have got 30, 40 staff today and try and convert that into 300 and 400 over sort of 2 or 3 years by using, if it's life sciences, we'll use KPMG's life science advisor, we'll connect them with universities. We'll have a very sort of specific program. What we're trying to get away from is having a menu of activity that's very rigid. What we want to do is have a really flexible approach. So listen to those businesses and then use partners, stakeholders, business, connections, contacts, other cities. And we were talking about how we could lever what we're doing now today and really just give them that individual piece of knowledge, support that is ultimately the difference.
Right. So similar story ultimately ended up with a significant emphasis on kind of smaller, mid-sized businesses, and sectoral emphasis or size emphasis, and any particular strategies that came out to address that target?
I think on our side, the original plan just focuses generally on our market. We're deep diving, and I think we'll relook at that and consider life sciences. 34% of our exports, about $5 billion, is in that sector. We're the only U.S. metro recognized by BioPatel as having a concentration of workers in all 5 subsectors that they analyze: biologistics, ag tech, medical device, pharma. as well as R&D. But initially, definitely middle-sized companies, 25 employers and up, is kind of our sweet spot. We still have a strong manufacturing base that has been very reluctant by its nature to look beyond Michigan. And so it's a chance for us to expand in that area. One thing that we did and we talked about yesterday was we do have education and programming throughout the year, but they were big events, often sponsored by a law office or a bank, and we weren't reaching some of our most coveted targets. And so we started a webinar program that we'll do quarterly webinars that are an export boot camp that break it down into 101. They're during the lunchtime, they're free for members to access, and it's a great way for them to gain and start to, because I think you're right, it's knowledge and a handshake. They just have to understand who can they rely on, who are the great partners, and where could they go and effectively grow their business. So that's been one tactic that we've done to try and really look at that mid-sized market and help them expand beyond just the United States.
And for Atlanta, you're looking at the same thing, small and medium business. Now, small business, the focus for our plan may be more in helping them to connect with the right resources to understand how to get started exporting versus medium-sized companies that already have begun exporting to one market. If they already have gone to one market, getting them to one additional market is a lot easier. But our plan is targeting both sets of company types. With respect to sectors, we're looking at where are our strengths in Metro Atlanta, both for exports as well as for investment. Those are the advanced industries. What we see, healthcare, IT, mobility, cybersecurity, fintech, so financial technologies. Payment processing is a huge sector for us. We've got a lot of companies in that realm. And thanks to our history as an Olympic city as well, our digital infrastructure was all enhanced in the mid-90s to the point now that in fintech, if you use a credit card, a debit card, or a gift card anywhere in the U.S., chances are that payment is going to be processed in Atlanta. We process 3 out of every 4 electronic payments in the U.S. And then our fast-growing industry now is film and entertainment. So whether you love The Walking Dead or The Vampire Diaries or just about any new movies, the film and entertainment industry has really just taken off in Atlanta and throughout the state of Georgia. And so we're now the number 3 state when it comes to film production behind just California and New York.
So what I'm hearing, a couple of things. One is there's a need I've identified in maybe the market assessment and strategic plan process about what companies, the challenges are to overcome. So a little bit about on the two ends. One is about entering the market, and then recurring exporters are expanding. And then there's been a fragmentation and some gaps in the system that you all have addressed or attempt to address in various ways that are tailored to what your system is, who the providers are, and then what the kinds of companies need. That was uncovered through the process, right?
Yeah.
The question that comes out of that, and then I'm going to ask anyone who has a question to be thinking about that and raise their hand. Leading in, you mentioned 2 things. I want to just get quick reactions to that. One is performance measurement. So this can't be another strategy that sits somewhere and then nobody takes action on it, or if people take action, then they have to demonstrate the progress is being made. So what kinds of performance measures have you looked at? And there are lots of different organizations involved here, right? So how do you hold each other accountable? And the second question is maybe tied into that is integration into core economic development activities for your regions and your plans. So how does this export or global orientation generally align with mainstream economic development efforts? Rick, you mentioned you were one FTE in a chamber before this effort that was really focused on international opportunities. How is this moved into the mainstream of your economic development efforts?
Well, thanks to Global Cities Initiative, we've doubled our team at the Metro Atlanta Chamber for Trade, so 2 FTEs now. No, it's again, as part of our Global Cities Initiative, when you talk about integration of trade into economic development, we have right now our initiative around the FDI plan as well. And the intent is that we will merge the 2 plans together for a combined global trade and investment plan. With respect to just getting out to the economic development agencies, again, we've been focused on trying to get them to incorporate exports and trade into their vernacular. They've always been really just focused on investment or the recruitment or the inward, but now they're understanding exports and they're understanding the importance and impact of exports, particularly for what they term business retention and expansion, or BRE. So they see exports now as a tool that will help them to build their existing companies and grow their existing companies in their communities. Around performance metrics, it has been difficult for us. We've had a lot of conversation amongst our core team and our steering committee as well around what's the best way to show that we have success, because the one thing that you see with exports is that it's not an immediate job creation factor. It's not going to happen overnight. It takes time to ink deals. It takes time to grow via exports. But the growth is there, and it's quality growth. It's quality job growth, and it's quality wages. So what we've looked at is, one, from an activity standpoint, how many companies can we get through the export process? And by virtue of identifying those companies that have gone through the export process and have an export success, we can turn them into success stories or case studies, which can then further our marketing message out to the community around exports and have more peers and have more opportunity.
Right. So quickly, Nancy, Andy, any comments on that?
Just for us, we did finish our regional plan. So we updated our SEDS plan that was 20 years old, exports and FDI, FTE, employment, as well as just it being integrated as a part of the overall plan.
First time for exports?
Oh, yeah, first time ever.
Okay. Ever. Right. Andy?
I think what we've found is don't overcook it. You know, it's easy to have a really wide and shallow approach. What we've tried to do is simmer it down, but add a lot more depth to 1, 2, 3 themes, and just simply focus on them and make sure that all of your business units, everyone's thinking along the same narrative, the same proposition, and they've got that knowledge when they're out there.
Okay. Do we have time for questions? We do. Excellent. Does anyone actually have one? I can see nothing because of these lights. So, okay, great. Thanks, Karen. Could you state your name and
Yeah,
your
my
question?
name's Pat Shea, and I'd be interested if each of the panelists could describe their success or, of equal importance, failure of reaching out to the academic communities in your respective communities and involving them. If it worked, how did it work? And if it didn't work, why didn't it?
Interesting. Well, with Atlanta, we've got over 60 colleges and universities within Metro Atlanta. Initially, with our plan, we engaged with Georgia State University, Georgia Tech, Emory, Kennesaw, Mercer, all our local major universities. They've been engaged from the very start. They're very interested in particularly the workforce component of it, but also they've been engaged because they are exporters themselves. So higher education in Metro Atlanta is a significant export. So every foreign student that matriculates in a local university pays tuition, pays room and board fees. Those are all categorized as exports. But in addition, it's opened up for our universities to view research and development as an additional export. That gives them the chance now to recruit projects for research and development from foreign companies to come to Atlanta, do either research on site or do joint research with other universities or other companies around the world. So they see this as a great opportunity to expand their business as well.
You talked a little bit about universities before.
Yeah, I did.
Any challenges that you said some good success stories?
Yes, we have. I think we've had some good success stories with our academic engagement. I really don't know of any other challenges at this point that we've had. They've been wonderfully embracing. I think it's been a natural synergy between organically what their goals were, how they wanted to better engage their international student base, and what our ultimate goals were. And they've been phenomenal for the research side. We couldn't do it without them, with the data dive that they've done and helping us with company surveys. One area that we had looked at that I know Columbus has done that we haven't pursued was continuing this research into white papers and what role would the would the universities play in continuing to tell our story and to continue to evolve the information that we have about our region? And that's one thing we haven't looked at yet.
I mean, in Columbus also, the Ohio State University has formal programs to utilize students, place students with companies to focus on international business plan development. And Ohio State had worked with the mayor in Columbus to actually serve more proactively as a gateway when they are present in international markets to relate back to the Columbus story as well. So that's an interesting model to look at. And for London?
I suppose we've got 40 universities. The challenge was they were all working internationally, often different messages, different promotions. They were not fighting amongst themselves, but it was competitive amongst themselves. What subsequently happened is they've created sort of an overarching umbrella organisation, and they join us whenever we do go overseas, which is great. So whenever the mayor's overseas, whenever there's trade missions, a member of the university's partnership will come along, and they will be demonstrating a unified brand, offer, narrative for the London University piece. I think one of the things we'd like to do with universities is we have 400,000 students a year, 100,000 from a lot of different countries. One of the things we're trying to play with is, can we use those students? You're going to have a student from Pune in India, and you're going to have a business in London that's interested in doing business in Pune with no kind of idea of what it is. Can I bring that student together with, he's in London, can I sit him in that business? So one of the things we want to try and play with is, can we get some of those international students into businesses and help guide and advise them? I think that we've got some challenges around it, but I think we could have a lot of fun playing in that space.
Any other questions? One more question? Okay.
Dean Dinas, I'm a regional economic consultant in the Utah market specifically right now. What part have your respective industry trade associations played in corralling their members and the expertise to work with government agencies to expand the exports, since they're the largest single players in the private sector, respectively? And thank you very much for all of your input.
Well, in Atlanta, I wouldn't say they've necessarily engaged with the government agencies, but our trade organizations, such as we've got a Technology Association of Georgia, or Georgia Bio, have been very active on their own, and they've engaged with us, and that's actually part of our strategy, is to leverage their constituency and leverage their distribution lists or outreach to reach companies specifically to talk about exports. Although I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't say the Technology Association of Georgia today, while I'm here, is hosting a program on exports with the city of Atlanta, the mayor's office. So they are engaged in Atlanta.
If you're meeting international trade, so our UZAC partners, they were on the core team. They're our implementers as well, because again, we're just serving as super connectors. We're not counseling a company on exporting. So our team within the state, working with U.S. Commerce Department, has been phenomenal to help us counsel companies and find companies, either being speakers or thought leaders. When it comes to cluster organizations, we're very blessed with an organization called CICP, Central Indiana Corporate Partnership. They opened up all their data for us. So having that cluster information that they've worked on for 20 years was pretty important for us to better understand our advanced markets. And they did serve on the steering committee, but they do not do economic development, so they're kind of hands-off. They focus on venture capital, workforce, and just research in general. But we're on the 19th floor, they're on the 18th floor. We share conference rooms. I mean, they're a great partnership.
All very cordial, actually. Whichever sector we've tried to lever, they're more likely to offer resource, whether that's I've got secondees from tech, from life science. In terms of the chambers, they've given me their whole international team. So, and part of the reason probably to that is devolution within the UK, so cities getting more powers to determine their own destiny. I think people probably see a bit of the writings on the wall, and they need to start thinking about cities more than maybe having this national approach.
And in some other markets, I'll just add, there have actually been leadership roles by the sectoral business associations. So I'm thinking about San Diego, where Biocom co-chaired their foreign direct investment component, build on to the export strategy, recognizing that there was a huge advantage and priority for that particular sector. The challenge is always, you want collaboration across the community, and if you have, or dealing with the politics of picking industry sectors to take leadership roles versus others, and I can say this as an outsider and agnostic about it, the key issue here is to focus in on the greatest assets, as Amy said. And there are sectors that are growing, and there are sectors that are significant already, and they have to be brought in. There has to be attention to what Andy said, attention paid narrowly to a particular topic in order to make progress versus making all their constituents happy. And that's the balancing act that's going to have that is happening in every community, and will ultimately have to happen here as well.
If I can just add to that as well, we've also appointed, so within those sectoral organisations, there's obviously champions. We've appointed them as ambassadors. So we actually deploy them when we can't deploy the mayor or teams within City Hall or London and Partners. We will use those global ambassadors. So they're actually, again, being involved, picking up the mantle and pushing their sector.
Right. Well, thank you all very much for your contributions. I'm now going to turn to the next panel, which is Salt Lake focused, and introduce Jeff Edwards, who will moderate the session. So please join me in thanking our panelists.